if for 1 second that this next generation thinks that their efforts are providing you a new Ferrari, they're out.
Oh yeah.
They're out. Like, you better motivate them. You better show them that there's an avenue for them to grow. There's an avenue that they can make more money. There's a career path for them. And they're not just sitting there making widgets so you can go to Hawaii. Like, that's going to turn them off. So you better find that way of motivating them. And most people, hey, listen, let's be honest. When you talk about the employees, they want to feel like they're part of something bigger.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CEO Podcast. My name is Mario, together with my phenomenal co-host and partner, Robert Hargrove, where we dissect everything for the CEOs. Today's guest is a consultant and a servant leadership coach, Joe. Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. Really, I appreciate the fact that you guys took some time and connect and have me on your show.
No problem. So before we dive into it, can you give a little bit of background, what you're currently doing? Where is your area of focus? And how does this relate to the CEO podcast and creating a legendary company?
Yeah, so currently I am a franchise consultant and a business consultant. Manufacturing is my niche. My background is aerospace engineering and manufacturing. Also done some automotive, helping them get in there, do some turnaround and get it to the level that it's capable of producing. That's my goals.
Oh, awesome. Before we began in the green room, one of the topics we agreed that we will explore is the breakdown of systems and processes, right, in these companies. So what you mentioned is most of the time these companies grow super fast. They kind of hit the niche. They grow, but they forgot to set systems and processes. So let's dive a little bit. So what are you seeing when it comes to that specific part? And how do you create a relationship with the CEO who is, in most cases, like the sole owner of the company?
Yeah, great questions, because with that becomes a lot of pride. So you do have to balance what you find and what you see with, hey, you might be throwing darts at the guy that created all of that, right? So you definitely have to balance that, and you have to communicate on a way that you are there to help improve his company. I've seen several of the owners that are financially sound already, so they're not always focused on that. But they are always focused on turnaround. They are always focused on how to get this to where they can go. How are they going to be open in the next 5 or 10 years? And that's where we really do specialize. And both what I see as an issue is both on the floor, the manufacturing process, and in the leadership. So if I was to start with the manufacturing process alone, when some of these companies grow to the level that they grow, they are so dependent on the talented machinist that they forget the documentation part of the process. And I did a 2-year turnaround in the automotive industry, and the owner failed to recognize that he didn't own his own processes because they weren't documented. So you would have an operator or a machinist pick up a drill, whatever drill he wanted. He would drill the part, he would machine the part. And when he left, when he retired, that process goes with him. Now, how is this company going to reproduce that part after he retires? The next guy is going to go through the same learning pains and process that guy did, with all the scrap, all the deviations. So it's called a frozen process. And we introduce a frozen process, and it's basically first you produce a conforming part, document all the tools, speeds, and feeds. Then you produce it at a rate, and then you lock it in, and everybody does the same thing every time. And that's start number one when it comes to that.
It's exactly this. You have this one person, and we always used to joke, but fortunately, sometimes this was true. He would go with a stethoscope, and he would just, listen to the machine. They're like, if the machine sounds funky, oh, something is wrong with it, without any other feedback. I always found that super funny.
Yeah. So I usually come in when they're struggling and somebody recognize their struggles and opportunities, right? And that's that
Mhm.
one guy that I think all of those shops have in common. They got, I'll call him Joe. So we have Joe. Joe knows it all. Joe is there 16 hours a day. We lean on Joe. Joe's our leader. He's that guy that can solve all the problems. And what they don't recognize is that's a terrible, terrible leader.
Oh
That's a
yeah.
manager. You're managing problems. That's all you're doing. And the value is all in you. If anything happens to Joe, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So if Joe could possibly document some of that stuff, could be coaching some of the people below him, now you start forming that structure that you're not so dependent on one person.
Let me ask you this. Kids, when I say kids, fresh off of college, bright young minds, they all want to do cutting edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI, medtech, fintech. No one wants to go into manufacturing. So, what would be your advice to the CEOs of this company on how to attract talent? How to attract these young kids, the fresh blood that they so desperately need? Because this is a very old workforce.
Absolutely. I could go for a long time on this. We promote that degree so hard and we've buried our trade schools. We've absolutely buried the trade schools.
Mm.
You can make a lot of money with that degree. There is no doubt. But I've hired more degreed people doing some basic jobs because they can't find the work that fits that degree. If you have a skill, if you have a trade, it's easier to monetize an actual trade than it is a piece of paper that says that you know something, but you haven't shown it, right? We should be advocating this stuff. Your company needs to be in those high schools with a voice, starting right at those high schools, giving tours of your place, letting them know that this is an avenue. You can make a lot of money in the manufacturing industry and it's got room to grow. So I'm an advocate of those trade schools and start speaking a little bit louder about those trade schools.
I'm thinking of the picture that somebody, a kind of a narrative. I imagine like I'm reading a novel about someone. You told me you were from Indiana, who starts a manufacturing company from nothing. Maybe they had a job working in an auto plant or aerospace plant. The thing starts to grow, and they're managing the whole thing out of their back pocket, or they have two or three assistants. And then at one
Mm-hmm.
point, the business starts to experience that hockey stick like growth, and you go from making your first million in sales to 25 or 50 million in sales. What I'm gathering from you is that the people never took the time to develop an organization. They had a business. It was probably started as a one or two person business where the CEO of the company was involved and had the vision, had the strategy, was involved in operations, was involved in sales, was involved in anything. But it seems like from what you're saying is at a certain point, the story got stuck. Instead of flowing like a river, being a river story, it became a rut story. The CEO was still there doing what he did on day one, except he now has a $50 million company, but no real team, no organization. So I guess the question I would have would be, well, I guess the first thing is you go in there and you discover that.
Right.
And then what do you tell the guy about this?
Well, building a business from scratch is a very difficult thing to do, right? Customers, you got brand trust, you got, just the building blocks take 3 years, right? So you go through this, and there's a point in your business as you grow this, and it's hard to see. It's hard to see when you're down in the trenches, but there's a point where you have to go from reactive, which is what we do as startups.
Yeah.
Everything that we do, just trying to keep it above water, keep it above water, keep it above water. Then you start float. Then you got to go to the proactive. That's when you got to start sitting back and say,
Yeah.
okay, those guys are surviving day to day. At some point, you hit that margin where you have to say, okay, what's next 5 years look like? What's next 10 years look like? And how do we build that? But when you're down in those trenches, it's really hard to recognize that kind of stuff. You're in it. You're an active participant until you start hitting that $1 million a month. Then you could probably start setting back and start making sure that the team's in place that you need in order to achieve that 1.5 million, that 2 million, and hopefully $5 million a month. You're not going to do it on your own, and people find out the hard way. And that's where the stuck comes in. It's just a repeat of last month's process without putting a foundation that you can stand on and then growing.
Yeah, let me quickly piggyback on this. So let's say you have the CEO and he has all of these people working. What would you say would be the first executive hire? And what to look for in that first executive hire? Because my assumption is if it's a mom and pop shop, they probably hired some of their friends and family because they hire for trust and not for performance.
Right? Exactly.
So what would you advise in these situations?
I'm a little biased to the executive operations directors, somebody that's going to have an overall view of not just the leadership team, but how the business is structured in systems and processes. That is so important. The structure at the base is going to be the systems and processes. That guy is going to be able to recognize that, and then he's going to start putting the people in the right place. So many times, this is one of the biggest mistakes that these people make, is they put the most talented person in charge because they have all the answers, but they're not leaders. Yeah. People around them hate their guts half the time, because they're, well, this is how I do it, and this is why I'm so much better, and this is what you should. I don't know why you don't know that. All of that stuff is poison. So to power the guy just because he's a great machinist doesn't make him a leader.
The CEO needs to hire a number two, that's the operations director, that helps him build an organization.
In my opinion, that's the best step for next level manufacturing from the mom and pop standpoint.
So when you go into an organization, do you do some period of due diligence to figure out what's going on, to get reality? And when you have that come to Jesus meeting with the CEO, what do you tell
him? Yeah. That's
I love that term.
Yeah. I actually learned this technique when I was with a company, Rolls-Royce. They sent me out to different companies that were struggling to produce hardware conforming and on time, and they would get engine shutdowns because of it. And the first thing I did was I always went to, and I interviewed when I got to the shop, either the CEO, if he wasn't there, it was the general manager. And you get that vision of what they think is wrong with the company. And 95% of the time, it's not what's wrong with your company.
What would they typically say?
Oh, they would say that they would have equipment issues, that personnel has been really hard to find the right personnel. They had a growth spurt that they're trying to catch up with. So that tells me that they're not planning outward. But you're supposed to say, okay, general manager, let's talk to you. Let's talk to the ops managers. Then let's talk with quality, supervisors, leads, and then you would talk to the floor. But I skipped it all, right? So I cheated the system. The system, the CEO is going to hear, he's going to know what the guys below him wanted him to know. He's no longer down in the trenches like that. So what I did was I talked to the general manager, and then I went right to the floor, and I would ask the operators, what's preventing you from doing your job? What could be better? And that's where you're going to find the bare bones truth. And you're going to find out that they're working with equipment that isn't up to par. They're rigging fixtures so the part fits. They're doing something outside of a standard process in order to make it work. And whether they've complained about it and didn't get the solution or didn't get the support, or they just thought that was part of their job, the answers are down on that floor. And then when you take all of that, and I always ask the same three questions. I sold you the business yesterday. Tell me the top three things that you would do to make it better now that it's yours, right?
Great.
Yeah, it's great stuff because they'll tell you the bare bones of the floor. And then 99.9% of the time, somebody's going to mention that leadership. Somebody's going to say that I would lead this different than they do it today.
So what would be, give me three quick examples of what would they do differently?
Oh my God. Yeah. So the last one I was in, the last general manager that was there, he had just left and they hired a new general manager. That guy went around and told everybody that I have a Rolodex of operators that can do your job. If you can't perform it, somebody else will.
Oh, that's a great way to lose everyone instantly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you got on your hands? You got 75 people that are working hard enough not to get fired. That's all you got. You don't have motivation to get better. You don't have anything.
All right, that's one. Give us two other type of things that they say.
Scheduling will be another one. They get Three different people from three different departments will tell them what they think is important. And it's always what that person thinks is important or where that person's in charge. So they have more than one voice coming to them on what to do on their daily activities. That would be another one. And then I would hear a lot about that when it's crunch time, we operate outside the rules.
All right. Now, let's say now you've done your due diligence. You meet with the CEO of one of those great restaurants in Indiana. And what do you say? Do you come off like Mr. Nice Guy, or what do you say in that come to Jesus meeting?
Right. The first thing you do is never present a problem without a solution. So you can diagnose all of that kind of stuff and you can put it out there. If you threw it out there on the table, the meeting's over and now we're in defense mode, nobody's going to get anywhere.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right. So the first thing I do is I say that I'm recognizing that there's systems in place that are getting ignored that you may not know about. And I think this is the information.
Good framing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And what's something else that you might say?
Well, I would then talk about the leadership. Like those people that say that three different people tell them what to do and they're constantly having to do things 2 or 3 times because of the 3 people. I would emphasize that's when I would start the discussions about the leadership and the organizational chart and how it's currently structured. I would start then questioning what was the mindset behind it. And it's usually like, hey, man, it just happened as, we were in reactive mode, right? So we were putting people in charge, right? So we start getting those discussions and then we start talking about the difference between management leadership and what a servant style leadership would do and how the organization changes once you get into a servant style leadership.
I wanted to open this avenue because, again, in the green room, we did mention servant leadership. Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking is the following. I'm a CEO. I've built a manufacturing business from bare hand. I have a 45 million turnaround a year. I'm making more than decent money. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Servant leadership doesn't sound too appealing. Let's put it like that. If I built something from the ground up, right? Like, who am I to serve anyone? I'm blowing it up a little bit. I'm sure you're not getting exactly those conversations. Maybe you are. Who knows? But how do you go from this specific point? I mean, egos can get bruised immediately. And if you bruise them, you lose them.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Tell me how you are going to support the next generation of business. Today's industry, there is an unbelievable opportunity out there for the 9-to-5 worker. How are you going to be a better facility than your competition? Right. So you have these new people that are coming in, like you said, the new kids, they just want that cutting edge technology. They want that.
Yeah.
I tell you what they don't want punched in the throat and told that if they don't get their job, they're going to lose their job. They're going to walk right out on you.
Oh, yeah. Instantly.
So yesterday's leadership will not work in the next 10 years. You will not be able to threaten yourself into productivity. You will not be able to threaten jobs. That Rolodex of people that'll come in and work in an abusive environment, that's going to be gone. What's your plan? Because your workforce is like that now. And I'll give you an example of the first time I actually got into a supervisor role, right? This was my big mistake. And this is what I see a lot of times. So the guy that was doing it before was definitely a throat puncher, a desk pounder, but his performance was excellent, right? Well, he got promoted. Right. So I'm the new supervisor. Well, I saw how that guy performed. So I thought to myself, that's what a supervisor is supposed to do. So I went my whole first year pounding and punching like he did, just exactly. And my numbers looked great. I mean, I overperformed. I'll be honest with you. Everybody around me was miserable and I was miserable every day going home, working I created a toxic environment and now I'm working in that pool of toxicity, right? And then I realized that I let the position influence my personality instead of my personality influencing the position. And that's when I started the journey of servant style leadership. I then became a worker for my 32 people in my department, and I served them instead of me being their boss.
Yeah.
They all need the tools, they all need the education, they all need the resources, they all need instructions. And it was my job to provide that. And if they had all that, they're going to be successful. So
Yeah.
now I'm serving them instead of them serving me.
One of the drivers of Legendary Company, what Robert and I are doing, is CEO as a phenomenal person, right? So yes to the personal brand, and yes to the larger than life types, but it is CEO that is a servant, CEO whose job and responsibility is on the highest level. I think the days of gung-ho CEOs like Enron's, I'm specifically using that example, are kind of gone.
Yeah.
Because young kids, as we mentioned, they don't care, man. They will just get up and leave.
Yeah. If for 1 second that this next generation thinks that their efforts are providing you a new Ferrari, they're out.
Oh, yeah.
They're out. Like, you better motivate them. You better show them that there's an avenue for them to grow. There's an avenue that they can make more money. There's a career path for them. And they're not just sitting there making widgets so you can go to Hawaii. Like, that's going to turn them off. So you better find that way of motivating them. And most people, hey, listen, let's be honest. When you talk about the employees, they want to feel like they're part of something bigger. They want to feel like they're contributing, and they want to feel like they're part of something bigger. And the old style was, I'm afraid to give you a compliment because I'm afraid that compliment is going to follow a raise request.
And bad performance.
Right.
So if I tell you you're doing a phenomenal job, you will relax. You will begin slacking off.
Well, no. So if you have a plan in place with all of your employees, and this is where structure is going to be really important, because the CEO can't plan everybody's career path.
Yeah.
And not every career path can end up as the general manager, right? So it's got to be a little bit more realistic. But the layers of this, we could be growing these people with a career path opportunity. Like, so you start on a machine, but you want to become an engineer. How do you get there? Well, here's the steps in nurturing that. And this is what you can expect along the way. That way, when you go up and you tell them that they're doing a great job, it's not about a raise. It's about moving you through the system. Hey, man, you might be ready for that next level of whatever that might be. But there's a step process. And now you have the structure in place and you have the process in place that everybody's following it. And it's easier to guide people than if it's, hey, when do I get a raise? Or, hey, how do I get there? I don't know how to get there.
I'm sort of organizing the different ideas we're talking about in my mind. One is, you need a leader who's, for lack of a better word, a wonderful person. Whenever I find a successful, a legendary company, there's always an extraordinary human being at the head of it. Who's a natural leader, who's a good manager, has generosity of spirit. Then, a lot of the leaders that we speak to talk about vision and strategy, but they take organization for granted. You're making us think that organization charts and systems and processes, the importance of those are often overlooked, especially in small to medium-sized enterprises.
Absolutely. And it's the foundation for success.
But now let me bring it to another point. I remember a number of years ago, we were doing a program similar to Search for Excellence. And we had a video that we were watching with 3 different companies. One was Harley Davidson, one was General Motors, and the other was the Dana Corporation. But anyway, one thing that really stuck in my mind was the leader of the General Motors plant. She was one of those great leaders, a wonderful human being. She had an organization structure, but what she talked about was the power of teams. And she put together in this company these teams that would bring all the different pieces of the puzzle together. And I remember her saying the power of those teams is damn near infinite. So could you comment on that? Is that an important part of your work too?
Well, that's building your leadership.
Structure may not be enough. You need to have teamwork, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, you absolutely have to have teamwork. And that's what an organizational chart is. It's the team of who does what and the accountability level of each one of those people within that organizational chart. And so many times we operate outside of our silo and we start drifting into somebody else's silo. And that's not a good thing. You think, I'm going above and beyond the call of duty. But that's not good. Somebody's already supposed to be there for that. So that means you're stepping on somebody. So when you say that you build a team that's respecting each other and respecting each other's experience. They're not going to step on each other. You can trust that team in a room that you're not in, and they're not saying something that's ill-advised about you. They're not using you as a rung on a corporate ladder to get up. That's what a team is. It's a respected team for everybody's capability within that industry.
I was thinking of a continuous improvement team, a team that spotted problems and then got together and fixed them. That was the context of this.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, continuous improvement can be another whole topic for me. I love that stuff. So, when you talk about a continuous improvement team, the value in that continuous improvement team is probably higher than most value added teams that you would put into place, because you've already agreed with your customers at this expectation. And normally if there's a problem that you got to dive into, you're performing lower anyway. So reputation can be damaged. Not only that, and the financials can be damaged. So getting to the root cause of an investigation like that is the most important part. And a lot of times with weaker teams, when you're looking at the continuous improvement part, they find a problem, but not the problem. So they go off and they start fixing it. And well, there's 5 Band-Aids on the original problem. And the actual problem is down here.
That's why they need a coach to cut through to the truth.
That's exactly what they need.
Mario, do you have some questions?
Well, I think we can slowly move into final thoughts. So, concluding this podcast to the end, Joe, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. You are a wonderful guest. So thank you for this. My final thought on this, and this is both coming from my work as a CEO coach and as my experience as working in industry, specifically Industry 4.0, from the other side of the selling into these companies a few years back. It's how do you keep motivating young kids that are coming from schools and colleges to join, because manufacturing is not sexy. It's dull, it's boring, it's manual work, it's a lot of long hours. Sure, everyone wants to be the next AI tech unicorn and make billions and billions of dollars. They don't know that 99% of those will fail anyway, because that's just business. So I really loved your idea of the CEO getting into trade schools, getting into high schools, CEOs doing the tours of the manufacturing floor, being completely fascinated by machinery and the complex systems that are built, because you put in raw milk from one end and the other end comes yogurt that you can drink. It's not magic, but this is how we do it. Right. So my final thought is I really loved your idea on CEOs stepping out of their offices, getting into high schools, getting into some of these trade schools, and then inviting young kids to see, you can make a lot of money. The culture is radically different than it was when your parents maybe worked at a manufacturing facility, or your grandparents. And look, there is a lot of this phenomenal high tech that we now have. Maybe a little bit different in nature, but it's still high tech. So that's my that's my final thoughts for this podcast. Robert?
Well, I think that would summarize my final thoughts as well. I'd have a few things to say once we conclude.
All right. Joe, final thoughts?
Yeah, I would argue that manufacturing isn't sexy. I would love to introduce you to some of the electrical discharge machinery that they do with 5-axis capability, 6-axis capability, laser ablation, that a beam of light can cut through metal and hold tolerances at half your hair, and water jet, where they're cutting metal with the precisest cuts with the mirror finishes with water and sand. So manufacturing is very sexy. It's very technical. And if you get into an industry like an aerospace, you're going to be blown away when you get into this kind of stuff. And they can hold your interest for an entire career.
Oh, nice. Cool. Joe, thank you so much for being a guest. And everyone listening, thank you for sticking around. This was the CEO podcast with Mario and Robert Hargrove.